Good evening, brothers and sisters in Christ. This evening, I wanted to encourage you from Mark chapter 4 and verses 35 to 38. And this was Jesus calming the storm. It says, "That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?'" What's interesting in this passage is while Jesus was with the disciples, it says a furious squall came up, or a storm. So often we think that the storms in our life will only come when Jesus is not with us. For the disciples on another occasion in Matthew chapter 14, Jesus sent them ahead in the boat while he went up a mountainside to pray. And what's interesting is on that occasion, a storm came when Jesus wasn't with them. But what's interesting is in this example, in Mark chapter 4, Jesus was with them in the boat, and yet the storm still came. What this reminds us is that we are not exempt from the storms, even though Jesus is with us. So the first thing to remind ourselves of is to expect the storms in life, even when Jesus is with us. So often we think as Christians that the moment we put our trust in Jesus, that automatically exempts us from the troubles and the trials in life. But Jesus never promised that. In fact, in John chapter 16 verse 33, he said, "In this life we will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." So the first point I wanted to remind you of and encourage you with is expect the storms in life. Even in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 to 27, it contrasts the wise man and the foolish man. The wise man built his house on the rock, that is Jesus and his words, while the foolish man built his house upon the sand, which refers to the one who does not put into practice and hear Jesus' words. Notice in that passage, the same storm came upon both the wise and the foolish man. And so once again, this is a reminder that putting our trust in Jesus, that hearing his words and obeying his words doesn't necessarily exempt us from the storms and troubles in life. But the second point I would like to point out from this passage is notice that when this storm came in Mark chapter 4, the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Don't you care if we drown?" What's interesting is just a few verses beforehand, in verse 35, Jesus told the disciples, saying, "Let us go over to the other side." So his words, his promise was that they would get to the other side. And the disciples had a choice to make. Do we choose to believe Jesus at his word? Or do we choose to believe what our eyes are telling us in this moment? That this storm could get the better of us. That these waves could capsize the boat. And we could drown. They had a choice to make. So too, for us as Christians, a time will come in our lives where we have a choice to make. Do we choose to live by faith in what Jesus has said in his word? Or do we choose to believe what our eyes are telling us in that moment, that the storm is going to get the better of us? My prayer is that we would learn to live by faith in what Jesus has promised and said in his word, that we would learn to trust Jesus at his word rather than our eyes might be telling us about the situation or circumstance or trial that we are in. May we learn to live by faith and not by sight. as it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. God bless.